Welcome, I'm Peter Block in San Francisco, and let me welcome you to our coverage of TCT 2013. With me are two people who absolutely need no introduction. Roxana Moran on my left, and further to the left, way out there, Spencer King, who obviously also everybody knows. So we're here to talk about the clinical trials being presented at TCT 2013, and I'm going to turn to Roxana first. Roxana, SAFE-PCI, a women's trial for angioplasty, radial versus femoral. Talk to me about that.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and it's great to have this news coverage from TCT 2013. Today, we've heard for the first time the results of the SAFE-PCI study, an all-female study for the first time conducted out of our National Cardiovascular Research cath-PCI, ACC cath-PCI registry, with a randomization done through this registry, with site selection done through the registry participants, and an ability to actually download and get data out of the registry to populate a clinical trial. How wonderful was that? I was really thrilled to see that for the first time to answer a very important pragmatic question, radial versus femoral in women. And we know women have more vascular complications, they have much more bleeding, but yet radial access is not being used in women because their arteries have more spasm and more difficult. And as a result, we really don't know, is it really safe and effective to use the radial access? So this was supposed to be a 3,000 randomized patient trial, trying to get about 1,800 PCI patients, PCI women, women undergoing PCI. Unfortunately, the trial was stopped early because we're doing very, very well in PCI.
As a matter of fact, we're doing very well. The bleeding rate was so low that they could never figure out how they could ever show that there would be a difference. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right. And I think that the DSMB, which was led by Dr. King, really looked at this and said, well, this is going to be a futile trial, that you'll go to 3,000 patients, and unless you want to increase your sample size, you probably will not show the benefit. And I think rightly so, they suggested that this should be stopped. It wasn't for safety reasons, it was for the fact that perhaps you weren't going to show, it would be futile. You wouldn't be able to see the benefit.
The discussion about the trial was interesting as you got to that point, because when you get to trials and the event rate is low, you're faced with the question of, can you ever get to something, or do you change a bit and enroll higher risk patients? And the discussion appropriately finally was like, really trying to answer the question about the kind of patients who are in this trial, not taking STEMI, acute infarcts and all that kind of thing, and throw them in where you might have seen a difference, but stick with the idea. But the result to me was enormously interesting, not only from the design of the trial and the fact that we're utilizing the NCDR to do it, but the fact that for both groups, femoral and radial, the adverse outcomes plummeted. The bleeding plummeted because everybody learned how to manage bleeding, not only from the radial, but from the femoral.
That's
so it was
absolutely
very,
right.
We haven't told anyone what the outcome is yet, so what is the outcome?
Well, yeah, so obviously, as the DSMB had suggested, that the PCI cohort, they only randomized about 300 patients in each arm, about 600 or so patients, and it didn't reach statistical significance, although there was an absolute risk reduction of about 1.7%. A relative risk reduction was much higher, about 60% reduction in the bleeding, but didn't reach statistical significance. There was access site crossover, significantly higher if you attempted radial first. So that was that. That was in the PCI primary analysis cohort. When you looked at the entire randomized group, you actually found that there was a significant reduction in both vascular and bleeding complications in the entire group, the cath-PCI group. And again, the same crossover, a higher rate of crossover.
So let me ask Spencer a question. You were on the DSMB on this one, weren't you, Spencer? So, right? Yeah. So I'm not going to ask you for a conflict here, but I want to ask you a sort of an interesting question. Since this is NCDR data, registry data, is there a possibility that some of this is underreported data, and we're not really seeing truth here? Could that be? Is that part of what makes this such a funny trial?
That was not a worry we had. You know, this was a little painful as chair of that DSMB. I have a philosophical bias against stopping trials, unless we're really causing trouble. So we didn't want to do that, but we felt like we had to say, look, the event rates here are so spectacularly low that you're never going to get to the answer. So then the decision had to be, do you continue just to establish other safety measures? And they did, and so I think the results were interesting and helpful. They don't say you have to do a radial in women, they don't say you have to do femoral in women, but we learned a great deal about it, and I think the mechanism of doing this trial is going to be applicable to a lot of trials in the future using the NCDR ACC database.
Well, the good news is that now women can have their choice. I mean, the good news is you really do have a choice of how you approach these patients. Let me move on.
Oh,
okay?
You want to move on? Okay.
I know you probably want to say something more of it. We can come to back at the end. So let's move to Sort Out 6. Spencer, give me a quick summary of that trial.
So the Sort Out trials compared one stent to another. By and large, they are comparing a bioabsorbable polymeric coating, Biolimus eluting stent, to other stents. In this one, the comparison is between a bioabsorbable coating and a biostable coating, namely the Resolute stent using zotorolimus. When they did that, the comparison was carried out only for 1 year at this point, and it does not show a difference between the two strategies. They both had the same. The other question is with the bioabsorbables coating, do you decrease stent thrombosis? So that was an endpoint as well. Stent thrombosis also was not different at 1 year. A caveat here is that some of the other Sort Out trials before using everolimus versus the bioabsorbable coating showed nothing at a year, but a trend to an effect at 5 years. We published in JACC Intervention the 5-year results of the LEADERS trial, which interestingly showed a bit of a separation as you went further. So it'll be important in this one to, I think, look at a longer term follow-up and see if the neutral events at 1 year are maintained or not.
I was going to say the same thing, because it seems to me that at 1 year you don't really get an input into what long-term stent thrombosis is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the idea that if you end up with a bare metal stent, your polymer's all gone, then theoretically any late effect of polymer, if there is one, would be negated.
Okay, thanks, Spencer. So let me go back to Roxana, because she wanted to say something to sort of end up with SAFE-PCI. Roxana, final thoughts.
I mean, I just think that the vision of putting together an NCDR registry and using it as a platform to answer important questions, especially comparative effectiveness studies that we have a difficult time getting funded, would be just seminal, and I think it's a fantastic venue for us and a platform. And just to get back to you about underreporting of events and registries, I think we have to also understand that the assumptions that we got for the trial were based on the same registry. So they were reporting those events before. There was no reason for them not to stop reporting. What the difference here is using more bleeding avoidance strategies, which is something that the NCDR taught us we should be doing, looking at benchmarking work. So it really just tells you the value of registries, especially our cath-PCI registry.
And we have in fact achieved a lower bleeding
Incredible.
rate, which is the whole point. So with that, we'll be right back.